Goggles Integra or goggles N3 with the O4 Air unit? Oh, man. I said in my DJI Your Questions Answered video, I proposed that someone might want to switch from the Integra to the N3. And the chat thought that was ludicrous. And honestly, after reading all the comments, I also thought maybe I got a little carried away. You know, sometimes you're sitting there and you're thinking, and you sort of decide what you're going to say in the video, and then you record the video, and then when it hits the real world, you go, was I a little bit sort of up my own butt there, you know? Because the Integra doesn't give you access to racing mode, and the Integra doesn't give you access to 60 megabit per second. But it does have 100 frame per second OLED screens and is a smaller form factor. Now, my thinking was that if you're going to be using the O4 Air unit, then surely you want 60 megabits per second, and surely you want racing mode. And no, the latency on the N3 is not as good as the latency on the G3 in racing mode, but you're still getting racing mode. It just drops every other frame, so you only have 60 FPS instead of 100 FPS, or 50 FPS instead of 100 FPS, but the latency is still better. And I thought it's not insane that somebody would say, well, I'm going O4, I want the racing mode, I can't afford the G3, I'm going to sell my Integras and I'm going to buy an N3. Some in the chat thought that that was insane and no one would do it. Assuming you're using the O4, racing mode is viable on the N3, even with a 60 hertz screen. The latency is not as low as on the G3, but it is still lower. The question is it lower than the Integra with the 100 hertz screen? And what I've been told is that the over-the-air signal is still just as fast. So you still have 100 frames per second going to the goggle. It's just dropping every other frame for the display. And there's a tiny bit of extra latency because the display is only refreshing 50 times a second instead of 100. It's something like 4 milliseconds. But I think you're still getting a benefit of racing mode even when you're using the N3. So if you are interested in using racing mode and getting a decrease... So the question that I don't know the answer to is racing mode on the N3 lower latency than 100 frames per second on the Integra? I don't know the answer to that. I think it is, but I'm not sure. And that would be the question of whether you want to switch. But the real answer is sell your Integras for... Save up your pennies, sell your Integras for $250, maybe $300, and then just buy a G3 and be a baller. That's the real answer. Right? The answer is always have more money. I don't know if you guys have figured that out. Yeah, Valenti.
I just wanted to see Mads replied in the Discord. He said, yes, it is.
What did he say?
I assume talking about the latency.
The latency of the N3 is lower than the Integra?
He said, yes, it is. So I'm assuming that's what he meant by that. That's what the question you posed.
Thank you, Mads Tech. Mads Tech's the man. Oh, I see. It's not. I haven't scrolled down. Okay, so Mads Tech says that the latency of the N3 in racing mode is lower than the latency of the Integra in 100 frame per second mode. At which point, that's the point. So now I feel vindicated. That's the reason why somebody might sell the Integra and get the N3 instead. If they're very interested in racing mode, you get lower latency. It's not as low as if you got the G3, but it is lower. And you're giving up the OLED screens. But I got to tell you, the N3 is not a terrible experience. I've used the N3 a little bit. It's not a terrible experience.